Welcome to Nigeria, ma.
Thank you, my dear. You must be our maid.
Yes, madam.
Oh my goodness, this Nigerian stew is delicious. I think I am becoming African already. Thank you, madam.
Oh no, my stomach! What did you put inside the stew? I need to use the bathroom right now. Where is the bathroom? Hurry!
Over here, quick, follow me, my love.
Worst stew ever. Look how you made me mess up everywhere. Make sure you clean up my mess.
She cleaned the other woman's vomit. She helped another woman marry her own husband. She believed it was all part of a plan. But what happened after they arrived in Canada changed her life forever.
3 months earlier, if anyone had told Adobe that one day she would pretend to be a servant in her own home while another woman called herself her husband's wife, she would have laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. Back then, her life was far from perfect, but she still believed that no matter how difficult things became, she and her husband would always face them together. Adobe and Kelechi had been married for almost 10 years. They were blessed with 4 beautiful children who filled their tiny rented apartment with laughter, noise, and endless wisdom. The house was small, with cracked wall and leaking roof that dripped whenever it rained. But to Adobe, it was home. Life, however, had become unbearably difficult. The landlord had already warned them 3 times about their overdue rent. Every knock on the gate makes Adobe heart race because she feared it might be another demand for payment. Food had become a luxury. Some mornings, she pretended she wasn't hungry, just so her children could eat the last bowl of garri in the house. At night, she often drank only water and told her children she had already eaten while cooking. She was lying. She simply couldn't bear to watch them sleep hungry. Meanwhile, Kelechi searched endlessly for work. He tried different businesses, but none lasted. Each failed attempt made him more frustrated, and the burden of providing for the family weighed heavier on him. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. One evening, Kelechi walked into the house, carrying several expensive shopping bags. Adobe stared in disbelief. Inside the bag were a brand new phone, expensive designer clothes, costly wristwatch, and groceries that they could not have been able to afford in months. There were cartons of noodles, bags of rice, frozen chicken, drinks, and snacks the children had only admired from shop's window. The children screamed with excitement as they rushed to hug their father. To them, it felt like Christmas had come early. But Adobe remained silent. Her eyes stayed fixed on her husband. Kelechi, she asked softly, where did all this money come from? Kelechi hesitated. For a few seconds, he looked away. Then he sighed deeply. There are some things you are better off not knowing. Adobe folded her hands. No, I need to know. He remained quiet before finally speaking. I met some friends. They showed me another way of making money. Adobe frowned. What kind of work? Kelechi lowered his voice. I chat with lonely elderly women overseas. I make them fall in love with me. They send me money. The room became silent. Adobe felt as if someone had poured cold water over her body. You scam people, she whispered. They are innocent women. Kelechi quickly defended himself. I'm not robbing poor people. They are rich. They have more money than they can spend. Adobe shook her head immediately. No, this is wrong. What if someone did this to your own mother? Kelechi laughed dismissively. My mother isn't an old American widow. Adobe became angry. Evil is evil, no matter who the victim is. For weeks, the argument continued. Every day, Kelechi tried convincing her. He reminded her of the unpaid rent, the hungry children, the school fees they couldn't afford. He would point at the empty food cupboard and ask, will you honestly feed these children? Slowly, Adobe's resistance began to weaken. She hated what Kelechi was doing, but she hated watching her children suffer even more. Eventually, she stopped arguing. She didn't join him in chatting with victims, but she accepted the money that came into their home. Little by little, their life changed. The landlord received his rent. Children returned to school wearing neat uniform. There was food on the table every day. For the first time in years, Adobe felt they could finally breathe. She convinced herself that maybe everything would be okay. She had no idea that accepting those few bundles of money would one day destroy everything she loved. One evening, Kelechi rushed into the house, looking unusually excited, his face glowing with confidence. "Adobe," he called. "I have got big news." She smiled. "What happened?" He lowered his voice. "Margaret is coming to Nigeria." Adobe frowned. "Who is Margaret?" Kelechi smiled proudly. "My biggest client. The American widow I have been talking to for the last 3 years." Adobe eyes widened. "The one sending you all those millions?" "Exactly. She wants us to get married." Adobe's face instantly lost its color. "What?" Kelechi nodded calmly, as if he had just announced the weather. "She believes I'm single." She had already booked her flight. For a few seconds, Adobe couldn't speak. "What are we going to do?" she finally asked. Kelechi smiled. "I already have a perfect plan." He moved closer. "When she arrives, you will become our housemaid." Adobe stared at him in disbelief. My what?" "You will pretend to work in this house. The children will stay with your mother in the village. Take down every wedding picture. Hide every family photograph. Remove your wedding ring. Nobody must know you are my wife." Adobe felt tears filling her eyes. "You want another woman to live in my house? It's temporary," Kelechi assured her. "When she returns to Canada with me, everything will be over. I will collect enough money. I will divorce her. Then we all will move abroad together." Adobe remained silent. Her heart screamed that something about the plan was terribly wrong, but she looked around at the comfortable house they were living in now. She thought about the children, their future, their dreams. Finally, she nodded slowly. "If this is for our family, I will do it." Kelechi hugged her tightly. "You will never regret this." Few weeks later, Margaret's plane landed in Nigeria. Adobe had already packed the children's belongings and sent them to the village. She removed her wedding ring, wore simple clothes like a domestic worker. Every trace of her marriage had disappeared from the house. When Margaret stepped out of the airport, she smiled warmly before throwing her hands around Kelechi. "My love," she exclaimed happily. Kelechi hugged her back with the same affection he once reserved for Adobe. Adobe stood quietly behind them, carrying Margaret's heavy suitcase without saying a word. Margaret looked at her with a friendly smile. "Oh," she said cheerfully, "you must be the maid." Adobe swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a polite smile. "Yes, madam." And with those two painful words, she unknowingly took the first step towards the greatest betrayal of her life. Margaret settled into the house as though she had finally found the love she had spent years searching for. She was fascinated by Nigeria, but almost everything about the country surprised her. The scorching afternoon heat made her sweat endlessly. The constant traffic left her exhausted. And every time goats wandered across the road, she grabbed Kelechi's hand in public. Her reaction often made everyone laugh, and she laughed too, believing she was beginning a wonderful new life. One afternoon, Margaret excitedly told Adobe, whom she believed was only the housemaid, that she wanted to taste real Nigerian stew. Adobe smiled politely and spent hours preparing a delicious pot of rich tomato stew with tender meat and rice. Margaret loved every bit, praising Adobe's cooking and even asking for a second plate. But a few hours later, disaster struck. Margaret suddenly developed a terrible stomach upset. She rushed repeatedly to the bathroom, vomiting and suffering from severe diarrhea. In the confusion, she accidentally soiled her clothes and part of the bedroom. Ashamed and uncomfortable, Margaret became angry instead of grateful. She accused Adobe of trying to poison her and called her useless maid who didn't know how to cook properly. Without saying a single word in her defense, Adobe quietly cleaned the bathroom, washed the stained clothes, and changed the bed sheet. and took care of Margaret throughout the night. Every harsh insult pierced her heart, but she reminded herself that it was just temporary. She believed every sacrifice would be worth the reward once Kelechi fulfilled his promises. As the wedding day drew closer, Margaret invites Adaobi to accompany her while shopping for a wedding gown. Excited like a new bride, Margaret happily asks, "Which dress do you think Kelechi would like the most?" Fighting back tears, Adaobi forced a smile and helped her choose the most beautiful gown in the store. That night, she carefully ironed the same wedding dress in silence. Tears rolled down her cheek. She was preparing another woman to marry her own husband. Finally, the day for the civil wedding arrived. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Friends gathered to celebrate while Adaobi moved quietly from table to table, serving drinks and making sure every guest was comfortable. She even stood among the bridal attendants, smiling for photographs that would forever remind her of her deepest humiliation she had ever endured. Inside, however, her heart was breaking. After the ceremony, while Margaret was distracted speaking with guests, Kelechi quietly pulled Adaobi aside. Holding her hands, he whispered, "Everything is working perfectly. Once we get to Canada, I will send plenty money home. Then I will divorce Margaret and bring you and our children over. This is only the beginning of our better life." He slipped 100,000 naira into her hands before walking away. Few days later, Adaobi stood at the airport watching Kelechi and Margaret board their flight to Canada. He waved goodbye with a hopeful smile, convinced that the painful chapter of sacrifice was almost over. But weeks passed. Kelechi's phone call became fewer and fewer. Then one afternoon, after countless unanswered calls, he finally picked up. His voice was cold. "Adaobi, don't call me too much. Margaret is beginning to get suspicious." Before she could say another word, the call dropped. Adaobi slowly lowered the phone and stared silently at the blank screen, unaware that the man she trusted was already slipping further away from her life. Several months passed after Kelechi and Margaret left for Canada, and the hope that had kept Adaobi going slowly began to fade. Every morning, she woke up believing that today would be the day her husband would finally send money or call with good news. She kept assuring herself, "Kelechi promised he won't abandon us," but the money never came. The little 100,000 naira he had left behind was long gone. Rent had expired. The food cupboard was empty again. The children had returned from village, asking innocent questions about when their father would bring them to Canada. School fees piled up, and the landlord became impatient, threatening to throw them out if she didn't pay what she owed. Still, Adaobi defended her husband. She believed he was only being careful so Margaret won't discover their secret. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, Adaobi called Kelechi again. This time, he answered. Before she could explain her situation, his voice became cold and harsh. "Stop disturbing me," he shouted. "I'm staying in Canada. I don't love you anymore. I'm never coming back. Forget me." Then the line went dead. Few seconds later, she realized he had blocked her number. Adaobi dropped the phone and burst into uncontrollable tears. The man she had trusted enough to sacrifice her dignity had abandoned her without a second thought. With no money left, she began selling everything she owned: the television, the chair, the small refrigerator, even her favorite wrappers. But still, it wasn't enough. One morning, the landlord arrived with two men and ordered her to leave the house immediately. With nowhere to go, Adobe packed a few old clothes into a walnut bag and returned to her parents' village with her 4 children. The silence broke Adobe's heart. She wept bitterly. When she reached her father's compound, her father refused to welcome her. "I warned you," he said angrily. "You wanted easy money. Now, face the consequences of your choice." Only after Adobe's mother pleaded for a long time did he finally allow them to stay. The next morning, Adobe returned to the same farmlands she had once dreamed of escaping. After she walked under the hot sun, villagers whispered and laughed. Some even showed her pictures on their phone of Kelechi smiling beside Margaret in Canada, enjoying the luxurious life he had chosen over his family. For a while, the pain nearly consumed her, but instead of giving up, Adobe made a decision that changed her life. She asked God to forgive her for taking part in deceiving an innocent woman. From that day forward, she promised herself she would never again depend on dishonest money. She worked tirelessly on the farm, selling fresh vegetables, palm oil, garri and other farm products at the local markets. Slowly but surely, her business began to grow. The same villagers who once mocked her became loyal customers, and with time she was able to send all her 4 children back to school. Then, several years later, unexpected news spread across the village. Canada authority had undiscovered a large romance scam network. Kelechi had been arrested along with several others involved in defrauding loyal elderly women. Margaret finally discovered the truth that Kelechi had been married all along and had only used her for money. Heartbroken and betrayed, she divorced him immediately. Overnight, Kelechi lost everything. Meanwhile, Adobe's life had been completely transformed. She had built a successful business through hard work and honesty, providing a good education for her children, and regained the respect of everyone who had once laughed at her. She finally understood a lesson she would never forget. The money that came through lies disappeared overnight, but the life she built with honesty gave her peace she had searched all along. The end. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and follow us for more interesting story every week.